Another edition of your weekly program, African Union Journal on Africa 24. Hello and thanks for joining us. The African Union Journal brings to you updates on the actions of the African Union. Most African countries devote less than 20% of their national budget to education. The average percentage of qualified teachers per country was 78% in nursery schools, 89% in the primary, and 80% in the secondary. Figures that show that the African education sector needs reconstruction, one of the priority projects of the African Union's Agenda 2063. Details in this report. Promoting science and digitalization for a more resilient education sector is a challenge that the African Union is launching through the Continental Education Strategy for Africa 2015-2025. This vision is reflected in the inclusion of education and good governance applied to the education sector.
Also, education at all levels to be strengthened through innovative initiatives to enhance access, relevance, and inclusiveness and quality.
To achieve her educational goals, experts recommend that Africa invest in her infrastructure. Currently, most African countries devote less than 20% of their national budget to education. Only about 1 in 3 countries devote less than 15% of the national budget to education.
We believe that the African Education, Science and Technology Fund, as well as any domestic financing, should contribute towards the improvement of Africa's competitiveness in the 21st century. With skilled and well-educated workforce, state-of-the-art and well-equipped laboratories, to ensure that science can contribute to bring solutions to the problems that Africa is facing, including lack of properly educated and appropriately skilled human resource.
Improving African education systems also requires strengthening the skills of teachers. Above all, the challenge is to have qualified teachers on the continent. In 2019, the average percentage of qualified teachers by country was 78% in nursery schools, 89% in the primary, and 80% in the secondary.
But here in Africa, we're not doing that. So I love the way that the SDG goal is being structured. It's quality education, not just education. It's good that we are talking about number of out-of-school students. We should also focus more on the students in our school at the moment. How well are they learning? And I love how Her Excellency Opelino puts it, that the students of today will be working, the jobs are not even existing yet, just like we're not having what we call machine learning experts several years ago. So I hope we focus more on the professional development of our teachers so that they can take Africa to that height that we deserve.
The African Union wants to provide equal access to education for all in Africa. On the continent, considerable efforts have already been made. The proportion of school dropouts among those of primary school age have been halved from 35% in 2000 to 17% in 2019. The proportion of school dropouts among those of primary school age and secondary school cycle has fallen from 43% to 33% over the last 20 years. Education is one of the essential components of sustainable development. It can be considered as the action of developing a set of knowledge and moral, physical, intellectual, and scientific values. On the African continent, unlike the education of boys, that of girls is not fully guaranteed. More in this report.
On the African continent, men and women are not equal when it comes to education. For example, in 2008, the adult literacy rate in sub-Saharan Africa was 71.2% for men and only 53.3% for women, whereas sustainable development is so dependent on a well-trained female population.
L'école vous ouvre beaucoup de portes et l'école vous offre beaucoup d'opportunités. Aujourd'hui, à ce 21e siècle, pour une personne qui n'est pas scolarisée, surtout une femme, c'est vraiment très difficile pour cette femme-là d'être épanouie et d'apporter sa pierre au développement de son pays.
41% of the African population is under 15 years old. Here it is difficult to make significant investment in education. The share of GDP devoted to education being minimal and struggling to increase. Despite the hopes raised by the Junction Conference in 1919, followed by the Dakar Forum in 2000, the 2002 Education for All goals aimed at increasing literacy levels by 15% as well as gender equity in education by 2015 have not yet been achieved.
Il faut en fait que des budgets soient votés en conséquence. Pour cela, des budgets sensibles au genre. Il faut en effet encourager davantage de femmes vers les métiers de l'enseignement, que l'on ne retrouve pas seulement les enseignantes femmes au niveau du préscolaire ou du scolaire, mais que l'on retrouve également les enseignantes femmes dans le secondaire au niveau des universités et qui enseignent des matières généralement réservées aux hommes.
Economic efficiency can only be optimal when access to all spheres of society is the same for both men and women. In Africa, if women did not spend so much time fetching water during the day, that is about 3 hours a day, there would be, according to studies on women's education and development in sub-Saharan Africa, 1,000 hours of work saved per year, where they could, for example, carry out a remunerated activity.
On dit souvent que si nous éduquons une femme, nous éduquons une fille, nous éduquons toute une famille. Parce qu'une fille qui est devenue future mère, qui est allée à l'école, y amènera elle aussi sa fille dans la prochaine génération.
Currently, the majority of international reports show that Africa is making enormous progress in giving its population quality education. The average literacy rate in sub-Saharan Africa has almost tripled in percentage over the past 4 decades, rising from 23% in 1970 to 65% today, according to figures from the United Nations Development Programme in 2010.
Created in 2012 as a specialized agency of the African Union, the African Risk Capacity Group enables African countries to strengthen their disaster management systems and access rapid financing in order to protect food security and the livelihood of their populations. Zambia, which chairs the Pan-African Agency for the period 2020-2023, reiterated her commitment to support the actions of the institution during the 12th African Risk Capacity Conference of Parties held in South Africa early April 2022. Let's follow this report. Zambia, currently at the head of the African Risk Capacity Act, a specialized agency of the African Union, is committed to improving her relations with the Pan-African institution. Established in 2012 and in line with Agenda 2063, ACT was set up to help African governments improve their capacities to better plan, prepare and respond to climate impacts and natural disasters. Zambia's ambition for the African Risk Capacity Group was revealed on the sidelines of the institution's 12th Conference of Parties held virtually early April 2022.
Today I'm proud to note that the African Risk Capacity Group Board is now fully operational and has already made strides to discuss pertinent issues to our organization and has taken important decisions for this institution to move forward. For this reason, allow me to express my sincere appreciation to the work so far done by the African Risk Capacity Group Board. Nonetheless, it is high time for us to reflect on long-term financial sustainable solutions for our institution.
Zambia is one of the 35 member states that make up ARC. In 2020, a total of 12 African countries benefited from ARC insurance coverage. These countries include Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Gambia, Madagascar, Malawi, Mali, Mauritania, Mozambique, Niger, Zambia, Zimbabwe and Togo.
I also want to use this opportunity to thank our partners. We believed on day one to the concept of ARC and provided support and advice and counsel since we started ARC in 2012. If we are where we are today, is in part thanks to them. They provided support both in terms of premium financing, but also the support to the agency. We are renewing our commitment as an organization in expediting our product development so that what we put out there in the market for our member states continue to be relevant, because we are mindful that disaster does not mean the same thing to all of our member states.
In Zambia, nearly 2 million people were insured by ARC in 2020. This country's first participation in drought insurance risk pooling was in 2020 and included a government contribution of $0.2 million. At the 12th ARC Conference of Parties, which Zambia chaired for the first time early April 2020, the country reaffirmed her commitment to support the actions of the Pan-African Agency.
And the Africa Risk Capacity Limited, we founded to serve member states. It is important for both Africa Risk Capacity Agency and the Africa Risk Capacity Limited to bear in mind that they have their foundation in the treaty, and all actions should therefore be guided by the overall objectives of the organization as set out in the African Risk Capacity Treaty. I would like to assure you that the government of the Republic of Zambia will do all it can to discharge its responsibility as required.
Zambia is now endowed with new responsibilities within the ARC group as she will chair the institution for the period 2020-2023. Zambia paid a premium of $250,000 for drought insurance policy, and the country is set to receive a payout of over $3 million, which will help ensure her climate resilience. It should be noted that the African risk capacity has so far covered more than 85 billion people on the African continent. And on to our news in brief for this edition of the African Union Journal. The African Union announces a $150,000 solidarity fund to support South Africa following the recent devastating floods in the KwaZulu-Natal province.
The chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, announced the establishment of $150,000 solidarity fund from the African Union Emergency Fund to support the efforts of the South African government to respond to the recent devastating floods in the KwaZulu-Natal province. In a statement issued on April 20, 2022, the chairman of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mahamat, expressed his full regret and renewed his sincere condolences to the government, the people of South Africa, and the families affected by this natural disaster, which caused over 448 deaths, 63 missing people, and a lot of material damage.
Member states of the Economic Community of Central African States trained in the prevention of violent extremism.
The Central African sub-region is indeed facing a variety of security threats and challenges, including internal conflicts and crises, terrorism and violent extremism, with many active groups such as Boko Haram and others. Added to this are maritime piracy in the Gulf of Guinea, organized cross-border crime and cybercrime. As part of its Joint Framework Program 22-2023 for the prevention of violent extremism, the African Center for Studies and Research on Terrorism organized the second regional graduate course on prevention of violent extremism in Central Africa in response to requests submitted by the authorities of several member states. At the end of this training, the participants acquired common knowledge of the problem related to violent extremism and terrorism, as well as other related types of violence and their causes.
And the adoption of a roadmap on the production of methodologies on migration on the African continent.
Expat in migration statistics from 25 member states of the African Union, regional economic communities, and other regional and international organizations converged at the Expat Group meeting on the development of methodologies on migration statistics and mobility in Africa. The conference was held from April 11 to 12, 2022 in Marrakech, Morocco, to develop guidelines for the effective implementation of the migration agenda in Africa. The meeting included with the adoption of a roadmap on the production of methodologies on migration in Africa, in line with the revised strategy for the harmonization of statistics in Africa and the African Charter on Statistics, as well as a document on the state of concepts and definition used for the production of statistics in migration in Africa. The African Union Commission, in collaboration with the government of Malawi, will launch the catalytic action of the AU, ILO, IOM, ECA joint program on labor migration governance for development of integration in Africa from May 4 to 6, 2022. Created in June 2021, GLMP Actions aims to contribute to the strengthening of effective governance and regulation of migration and labor mobility for improved sustainable development, for inclusive economic growth and regional integration for the African continent. The first ordinary session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Migrations, Refugees and Displaced Persons will be held on May 23 to 24, 2022 in Malabo in the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. This session of the Specialized Technical Committee on Migration will focus on the validation on an important legal instrument that will contribute to the operationalization of the African Humanitarian Agency, the governance of migration inside and outside the continent, and those of several policy documents that will enhance the effective governance of issues concerning migration, refugees, and IDPs in Africa. The extraordinary summit of the African Head of State of the Industrialization and Economic Diversification of Africa will be held from November 20 to 25, 2022 in Niamey, in Niger. According to African Union, this summit aims at highlight Africa's renewed determination and commitment to industrialization as one of the pillars for achieving the government's economic growth and development objective.
Wamkele Mene is the first Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Operational since January 1, 2021, the African Continental Free Trade Area aims to strengthen intra-African trade by reducing custom taxes by 90% over 10 years, but above all to put in place a new economic system that limits external dependence. More about Wamkele Mene in this report.
The South African Wamkele Mene is the first Secretary General of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, a trade initiative operational since January 1, 2021. His role is to help the 55 member states of the AfCFTA to enhance local production and regional trade in order to significantly reduce external dependence.
And placing our continent on a path and a trajectory for higher levels of industrialization by developing regional value chains, whether it is in automobiles, in agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, regional value chains that will enable us to leverage on this market of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP, as we speak today, of 3.4 trillion United States dollars.
Between October 2020 and October 2021, African exports to world markets jumped, standing at 42%, yet intra-African trade during the same period stood at only 20%. With the establishment of the AfCFTA, Wamkele Mene intends to contribute to the dismantling of an outdated economic model in order to widen the scope of trade between African countries.
Now have an opportunity, and COVID-19 has pushed this to the fore. We now have an opportunity to leverage on the AfCFTA to manufacture much needed vaccines here on the African continent, to establish a generic drug industry here. If we are able to reform and reconfigure our intellectual property rights regime as a continent, again, through the AfCFTA, we would be positioning ourselves for reducing reliance on others.
With COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, the African Union has understood the need for Africa to enhance local production and consumption. Strategies to contribute to the strengthening of trade by reducing custom duties by 19% over 10 years through AfCFTA.
We know that where the agreement is implemented effectively, we know that by the year 2035, we have an opportunity to contribute $450 billion to Africa's overall GDP. We have an opportunity to boost intra-Africa trade by up to 80%. And we have an opportunity to lift almost 100 million Africans out of poverty.
Over the next few years, the AfCFTA will contribute to Africa's inclusive and economic recovery process. In this way, the African Union intends to revitalize intra-African trade and ensure that it is a drive for the continent's economic recovery.
Thank you for watching the African Union Journal. Stay tuned for more programs on Africa 24.